She returned to the house of secrets, and found a love that had been waiting for her all along. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which felt almost insulting. Tuesdays were nothing days, days that existed only to be endured. Mara Quinn had built her life on predictable things, quiet mornings, orderly shelves, documents centuries old that did not surprise her. She trusted paper because it did not lie once it had survived long enough. Ink might fade, but truth, real truth, left scars in fibers. This letter was wrong the moment she touched it. It was heavier than it should have been. The paper thick, textured, almost velvety beneath her fingers, like stationery chosen by someone who believed objects mattered. The envelope was cream, not white, sealed with dark blue wax stamped with a crescent moon split cleanly down the center. Her chest tightened. She had not seen that symbol in 15 years. Not since the night Vale House burned. Not since Elena. Mara stood frozen in the narrow galley kitchen of her London flat, rain tapping the window in soft, impatient rhythms. The kettle clicked off behind her, forgotten. Steam curled into the air like a warning she refused to read. Her name was written across the envelope in slanted handwriting she knew better than her own. Mara Quinn. No return address. No modern postage mark. As if it had traveled through time rather than distance. She should have put it down. She didn't. Her fingers traced the ink automatically, memory rising unbidden, late nights at a long oak desk, Elena leaning over her shoulder, murmuring thoughts aloud as she wrote, her pen moving faster than her mouth. Elena had always written like she was racing something unseen. Mara swallowed. She carried the envelope to the table, set it down carefully, as though it might detonate. Her hands trembled slightly, an irritation more than fear. She did not tremble. She had learned that long ago. The wax seal cracked softly when she broke it. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet flat. Inside was a single folded sheet. The handwriting was unmistakable. If you are reading this, then the house has finally let me go. Mara's breath left her in a rush she hadn't authorized. Her eyes skimmed ahead, heart accelerating, every instinct screaming denial. I promised myself I would never pull you back into this life. But the truth does not stay buried forever. And neither do we. She sat down slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. The room felt smaller. I need you to come back to Blackthorn Cove. Vale House remembers you. I remember you. There are things only we can uncover together. At the bottom of the page, beneath a pause so deliberate it felt like hesitation preserved in ink, was a name Mara had spoken only in dreams, and never aloud. Elena Vale. The letter slid from her fingers onto the table. Elena Vale was dead. She had died in a fire that tore through a cliffside house and left nothing but ash, smoke, and rumors that grew uglier with time. The town had mourned briefly. Then it had moved on. Mara had not. She stood abruptly, pacing the length of the kitchen, pulse roaring in her ears. Her mind raced for explanations, cruel jokes, coincidences, fraud. But every rational argument collapsed under one simple, devastating truth. No one else used that symbol. No one else wrote her name like that. No one else knew about the house letting go. Mara pressed her palms flat against the counter. She had left Blackthorn Cove with a suitcase and a vow, never return. Never ask questions that don't want answers. She had kept that promise for 15 years. Until now. The train north blurred past fields soaked in rain, the landscape shifting from familiar sprawl to wild edges she remembered too well. Mara stared out the window without seeing, the letter folded and refolded in her coat pocket until the creases softened. Blackthorn Cove had always been difficult to reach on purpose. The last leg required a bus that ran on stubbornness more than schedule. It wound along narrow coastal roads, cliffs dropping sharply into slate-colored sea. The driver didn't speak. No one else boarded. By the time Mara stepped off, the air tasted different, salt and damp stone and something old that refused to be named. The town looked the same. That was the cruelest part. The harbor lights glowed dimly against gathering dusk. Fishing boats rocked gently, their hulls creaking like they were whispering secrets to the tide. The pub stood exactly where it always had, windows fogged, laughter leaking out like it had never learned restraint. And above it all, perched on the cliff like a dark thought no one finished, stood Vale House. Mara's stomach tightened. It had been restored. Not fully, some scars remained, but the roof was new, the windows repaired. Light glowed faintly behind the glass. If you are reading this, then the house has finally let me go. She began the walk up the path, each step pulling her deeper into a life she had amputated to survive. The iron gate creaked open at her touch. The front door was unlocked. That alone told her everything she needed to know. Mara stepped inside. The smell hit her first, old wood, sea air, and lavender. Elena's lavender. Her throat closed. Mara? The voice came from the hall. Low. Familiar. Unmistakably alive. Mara turned. The woman standing there was older than the girl she remembered, but the bones of her were the same, the sharp cheekbones, the intelligent eyes that missed nothing, the posture of someone who had spent years bracing for impact. Dark hair streaked with silver fell loosely around her shoulders. Elena Vale met her gaze. You came, Elena said softly. Mara's vision blurred. Everyone said you were dead. Elena's mouth curved, not into a smile, but something closer to sorrow. I let them believe it, she replied. And just like that, the past stood breathing in front of her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Mara stood just inside the doorway, rain still clinging to the hem of her coat, her pulse loud enough to drown out the sound of the sea below the cliff. Elena stood several steps away, hands loose at her sides, as if she were afraid that reaching out might fracture the fragile reality holding them both upright. 15 years collapsed into silence. You look like you've seen a ghost, Elena said gently. Mara let out a short, breathless laugh that surprised her with its sharpness. I watched them pull your name out of the water, she said. I stood in a town square while people whispered about your bones. Her voice wavered despite her effort to keep it steady. Do you have any idea what that does to someone? Elena's gaze flickered, pain, guilt, something deeper that had had time to root. I imagined it every day, she replied. I just never imagined you'd forgive me enough to come back. Mara shook her head slowly. This isn't forgiveness. This is disbelief. Elena nodded, accepting the boundary without argument. That, too, felt familiar. Elena had always understood lines, where they were drawn, and when not to cross them. Come in, Elena said. You're soaked. The words were ordinary. Domestic. They landed with unexpected weight. Mara stepped further into the house. Vale House greeted her the way a body remembers an old injury, with recognition and ache. The entry hall was narrower than she remembered, or perhaps she was wider now, filled with years and distance. The stone floor bore faint scorch marks no restoration had entirely erased. The staircase curved upward like a held breath. You fixed it, Mara said quietly. Enough, Elena replied. Some things didn't want to be erased. Mara's eyes caught on a familiar detail, the framed sketch by the stairs, charcoal lines of the coastline drawn in Elena's hand. It had survived. You kept everything, Mara said. Not everything, Elena corrected. Only what mattered. They moved into the sitting room. A fire burned low in the hearth, its warmth subtle but persistent. Lamps cast pools of light that softened the shadows without banishing them. Elena gestured toward the sofa. Sit. Please. Mara hesitated, then did. She removed her coat carefully, folding it with the precision of someone who needed her hands occupied. Elena sat opposite her, not too close, not too far. The space between them hummed. Tell me, Mara said at last. Start with the fire. Start with how you're sitting here breathing. Elena exhaled slowly, as if bracing herself against a tide she had long ago accepted would eventually reach shore. It wasn't an accident, she began. You always knew that, didn't you? Mara's jaw tightened. I suspected. But suspicion doesn't hold up against funerals. Elena's mouth curved faintly. No. It doesn't. She leaned back, eyes drifting to the fire as though the flames were an easier thing to face than memory. My family trusted the wrong woman, Elena said. Margaret Hale. Solicitor. Quiet. Efficient. Everyone loved her. Mara stiffened. She handled the estate. Yes. And she wanted the house. Elena's fingers curled against her palm. Not just the land. What was hidden inside it? Mara's mind raced. The journals. Elena looked at her sharply. You remember. I helped you catalog them, Mara said. The letters. The false walls. Generations of women writing to women they weren't allowed to love. Her voice softened despite herself. You said the house was a confessional built of stone. Elena smiled, a real one this time, brief and aching. You always listened better than anyone. The smile faded. When Margaret realized what Vale House held, proof of stolen inheritances, silenced women, forged deaths, she threatened me. Subtly at first. Then not at all. Elena swallowed. She said accidents happened to people who clung to old houses. Mara's stomach twisted. So you staged one? Yes. Elena met her gaze directly now. But not without help. Mara frowned. Who? Elena hesitated. The lighthouse keeper at the time. Tom Barrett. He owed my grandmother his life. When the fire started, he helped make sure the body they found couldn't be identified. Mara's breath caught. A body. Elena's eyes darkened. Someone Margaret had already discarded. A transient. The town didn't ask questions. Silence fell between them, thick and heavy. Mara stared at the fire, anger and grief twisting together until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. You let me believe you burned, she said quietly. You let me carry that. Elena's voice broke for the first time. I thought if you believed it, you'd be safe. Safe, Mara repeated bitterly. I left the country. I know. I stopped trusting permanence. I know. I learned how to leave before I was left. Elena stood abruptly, crossing the room before Mara could stop her. She dropped to her knees in front of the sofa, close enough now that Mara could see the faint scar along her jaw, a scar that hadn't been there before. I know, Elena said again, tears bright but unshed. And I would take it all back if I could. But Margaret is dead now. The house, it's restless. And the truth is starting to surface whether I'm ready or not. Mara's hands trembled. She clenched them together. Why now? She asked. Because someone's been searching the walls, Elena said. And because they know you're the only one who ever understood how to read what's hidden. Mara looked at her, this woman she had loved, mourned, survived. And the letter? She asked softly. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. Because I'm tired of being alone in a house full of voices. Their eyes held. The fire cracked softly behind them. Outside, the sea surged against the cliff, relentless, patient. And somewhere within Vale House, something shifted, like a door long closed had finally begun to open. Mara woke before dawn. For a few disorienting seconds, she didn't know where she was, only that the ceiling above her was unfamiliar, traced with faint cracks like veins beneath pale skin. The bed smelled of clean linen and something older, something that reminded her of pressed flowers and dust warmed by sunlight. Vale House. Memory rushed back too quickly, the letter, the fire that hadn't killed Elena, the sound of her voice saying you came as though it were both gratitude and disbelief. Mara sat up slowly. The guest room was exactly as she remembered it, though she could not have sworn it should be. Pale walls. A narrow window facing the sea. A writing desk tucked into the corner, its surface scarred by years of use. Someone had restored it carefully, preserving the marks rather than sanding them away. On the desk lay a leather-bound notebook. Mara hadn't brought one with her. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and crossed the room, fingertips brushing the cover. The leather was warm, as if it had been handled recently. Inside, the handwriting was not Elena's. It was older. Sharper. Ink faded to brown. June 3, 1891. The house has begun to speak more insistently. We have learned to listen only at night. Mara's pulse quickened. She flipped the page. The walls shift when no one is watching. Not dramatically, not like stories, but just enough to hide what we cannot afford to lose. A chill traced her spine. This was not just a journal. It was a map. The house was quiet when Mara stepped into the hallway, the early morning light slanting through tall windows and painting long bars across the floor. She moved slowly, deliberately, listening for sounds of life. Elena's door at the end of the corridor stood open. She was already awake. Mara found her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair loosely tied back, standing at the counter with 2 mugs of coffee. The sight struck her with an intimacy that felt unearned and unavoidable all at once. "You always wake early," Elena said without turning. Mara paused. "You remember that?" "I remember everything that mattered," Elena replied, then seemed to reconsider. "Coffee?" "Yes," Mara said. "Please." They sat at the small kitchen table, steam curling between them like a fragile truce. For a moment, neither spoke. Mara slid the notebook across the table. "I found this in the guest room," she said. Elena went still. "I was wondering when you'd notice," she said quietly. "You left it there on purpose." "Yes." Mara studied her. "You're being watched." Elena's eyes flicked toward the window, then back. "You always did see too much." Mara opened the notebook again. "These journals, there are more, aren't there?" Elena nodded. "Dozens. Maybe hundreds. The women of this house didn't just write their truths. They hid them. Encoded them. Built the house around them." Mara leaned forward, excitement and dread threading together. "Architectural palimpsest," she murmured. "Layers of intention." Elena smiled faintly. "You used to say that." "I still would," Mara replied. "If I trusted permanence." Something passed between them then, recognition, regret, a shared memory of who they had been before fear taught them restraint. "Elena," Mara said gently, "someone has been searching." "Yes," Elena said. "And they're not subtle." She stood and crossed the room, pressing her palm flat against a section of wall beside the old pantry door. With a careful twist and a soft click, a panel shifted outward. Mara's breath caught. Behind the wall was a narrow passage, barely wide enough for one person, the stone smoothed by hands that had passed through it many times before. "I didn't restore this part," Elena said. "I left it as it was." Mara rose slowly, reverently, like she was entering a sacred place. "This isn't just a hiding space," she said. "It's a language." They stepped inside together. The air was cooler, damp with age. The passage opened into a small room lined with shelves. Journals filled them, leather-bound, cloth-wrapped, some tied with ribbon so fragile it looked like it might dissolve if touched. Mara reached for one, hands trembling now openly. "These women," she whispered, "they were archivists of themselves." "They had to be," Elena said. "No one else would remember them." Mara flipped through a journal at random, eyes scanning until she froze. "Elena," she said slowly. "Someone's already been here." Elena's face tightened. "How can you tell?" "These pages," Mara said, pointing. "They've been handled recently. Too carefully. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for." Elena swore under her breath. "And there's more," Mara continued. She turned the journal around. "This symbol, see how it's marked in the margins?" Elena nodded. "The crescent." Yes, Mara said. But look closer. The crescent had been altered, split by a thin line, just like the wax seal on the letter. That symbol isn't just a family mark, Mara said. It's a key. A way to cross-reference entries between journals. Elena stared at her. You're saying? I'm saying someone else understands the system, Mara finished. Or is learning fast. A floorboard creaked somewhere above them. Both women froze. Elena extinguished the lantern with a swift motion, plunging the room into darkness. They stood close now, breaths shallow, the awareness of each other sharpened by danger. Footsteps moved through the hallway overhead, slow, deliberate. Not the sound of a house settling. Not the sound of memory. Someone was inside Vale House. Mara felt Elena's hand brush hers in the dark, not quite a grip, not quite a retreat. A question. An answer. Outside, the sea crashed harder against the cliffs, as if urging the truth upward by force. And within the walls, the past held its breath. The footsteps lingered longer than Mara expected. She and Elena remained motionless in the dark, bodies angled toward each other, the space between them reduced to breath and heat and the quiet certainty that if one of them moved too quickly, the house itself might betray them. The sound came again, a soft scrape, as though someone were dragging their fingers along the wall upstairs. Testing. Listening. Mara's pulse hammered against her throat. Her instincts, honed through years of archival work and the quieter dangers of proximity to truth, told her this was not a thief in search of valuables. This was someone familiar with the geography of the house. Someone confident. Elena leaned close enough that her breath brushed Mara's ear. Side passage, she whispered. Left. Mara nodded. They moved together, silent, navigating the narrow corridor by memory and touch. Stone pressed against Mara's shoulder, cold and unyielding. Elena's hand found the small catch near the floor and twisted. The panel slid open. They stepped through just as the lantern's wick flared briefly behind them, light spilling into the room they had just vacated. A voice followed. Low. Female. Hello, it called. Elena? Mara's blood ran cold. They waited until the panel closed behind them, sealing the hidden space into darkness once more. The woman's footsteps moved closer, then paused. I know you're here, the voice said, almost conversationally. Elena's jaw tightened. That's her, she mouthed. Margaret's assistant. Mara felt a flicker of something darker than fear settle into place. The woman stayed for several minutes, moving through the room above them, opening drawers, rifling through papers without urgency. She left eventually, the front door closing with a deliberate finality that sounded less like departure and more like warning. Only when the sound of her car faded down the cliff road did Elena exhale. She shouldn't know the house this well, Mara said softly. She helped Margaret with the estate, Elena replied. Learned more than she let on. Mara closed her eyes briefly. Then we don't have time. They didn't sleep after that. By mid-morning, Vale House felt exposed in a way Mara couldn't articulate, like its secrets were no longer safely embedded in stone but hovering just beneath the surface, vulnerable to any hand bold enough to reach. They decided to go into town. Blackthorn Cove wore innocence well in daylight. The harbor glittered under pale sun, fishing boats bobbing like toys. The bakery door stood open, warm air carrying the scent of bread and sugar. People moved unhurriedly, smiling with practiced ease. But the moment Mara stepped into the street beside Elena, conversations shifted. Not stopped, shifted. Eyes followed them with a subtlety that would have fooled anyone who didn't know how to watch for it. She's back, someone murmured near the pub. Mara kept her gaze forward, spine straight. She had learned long ago that the worst thing you could do in a small town was appear apologetic for your existence. Elena, however, faltered. Mara felt it in the way her shoulder tensed, the way her steps slowed. They never liked me much, Elena said under her breath. They liked what you represented, Mara replied. Inheritance. Silence. Tradition. And when I stopped fitting. They rewrote you, Mara finished. They entered the records office, a low stone building near the harbor that had once been a chapel. The woman behind the desk looked up, her expression carefully neutral. Elena Vale, she said. Well. That's a surprise. I imagine it is, Elena replied evenly. I'd like access to the historic property files. Vale House. The woman hesitated. They're restricted. Mara stepped forward. On what grounds? The woman's eyes flicked to her. Recognition dawned. Mara Quinn. The girl who left. Mara smiled thinly. The woman who returned. A long pause followed. Finally, the clerk sighed and retrieved a heavy ledger from beneath the counter. You didn't hear it from me, she said quietly. But some files went missing last year. Mara's fingers brushed the pages as she flipped through them. By whom? The clerk's voice dropped. Margaret Hale's estate was accessed posthumously. Her assistant handled the transfer. Elena went still beside her. That's impossible, Elena said. Margaret died years ago. Yes, the clerk replied. But her influence didn't. They left the office with copies of what little remained, the sun suddenly harsh against their eyes. She's trying to erase us again, Elena said, anger threading her voice. Not erase, Mara corrected. Control. They stopped at the edge of the harbor, the sea stretching wide and indifferent before them. Mara turned to Elena then, really looked at her. You asked me back because the house remembers, Mara said. But you didn't just need an archivist. Elena met her gaze. No. You needed a witness. Elena nodded. I'm tired of being the only one who knows what's true. The wind whipped Elena's hair across her face. Mara reached out without thinking, tucking it back gently. The touch lingered. For a moment, the town fell away. Then a shadow crossed the ground near their feet. Mara looked up. The woman from the house stood across the street, watching them openly now. She smiled. And lifted her phone. The photograph felt like a small violence. Mara didn't know why that was the word her mind chose, only that when the woman across the street raised her phone, steady, deliberate, unashamed, it landed with the same cold certainty as a door locking from the outside. She wants us to know, Mara murmured. Elena's jaw tightened. She always did. They didn't confront her. Not yet. Power, Mara knew, came from choosing when to be seen. They turned away together, steps measured, neither of them looking back until the pub swallowed them in warmth and noise. Inside, Blackthorn Cove performed itself. Laughter rose and fell. Glasses clinked. The walls were layered with photographs, boats, storms, weddings, funerals. Memory curated by consensus. Mara had always found places like this more revealing than any archive. What a town chose to display told you exactly what it chose to forget. They took a small table near the window. She's trying to rattle us, Elena said. Make us act. And we won't, Mara replied. Not until we know what she's afraid of. Elena studied her for a moment, something like relief softening her shoulders. I missed the way you think. Mara didn't answer. The intimacy of the statement pressed too close to things she was keeping carefully folded. They left the pub quietly and returned to Vale House by the long path along the cliff, where the sea crashed below them with unembarrassed force. The house loomed ahead, dark and watchful, its windows reflecting the gray sky like unblinking eyes. Inside, Elena locked the door. Then the windows. Then, after a pause, she slid the iron bar into place across the kitchen entrance, a gesture that felt less paranoid than practical. Mara set the copied records on the table. Let's start where she wouldn't expect. Elena nodded. The West Wing. The West Wing had never been fully restored. Its rooms were colder, the walls thicker, the air heavy with the kind of silence that felt accumulated rather than empty. Mara moved slowly, fingertips grazing the stone as if the house might speak through texture. Elena stopped in front of a narrow door set unusually low into the wall. "This wasn't here before," Mara said. "It was," Elena replied. "Just not visible." She pressed the crescent-shaped medallion she wore, something Mara had only just noticed, into a shallow indentation. The stone shifted with a muted groan. The room beyond was small and circular. At its center stood a single wooden trunk. Mara's breath caught. "You didn't open it." Elena shook her head. It felt intentional. Like it was waiting. Mara knelt, examining the lock. It was old. Delicate. Designed to be opened by someone who knew patience. Inside the trunk lay one journal. Only one. Unlike the others, its cover was pale, almost white, the leather worn soft by hands that had returned to it often. No title. No date. Mara opened it. The first page was written in a firm, elegant hand. "If you are reading this, then the house has chosen you too." Mara felt Elena's breath hitch beside her. "This is newer," Mara said quietly. "Early 20th century. Maybe later." She turned the page. "They will tell you we were alone. That what we loved was a deviation, a weakness, a secret best left unnamed. They are lying." Elena sank down beside her. Mara continued reading, her voice barely above a whisper. "We were many. We built this place not to hide love, but to protect it. Stone remembers. Wood listens. And women endure." The handwriting grew more urgent as the pages went on. Names appeared. Dates. Legal maneuvers. Quiet marriages disguised as employment. Inheritances siphoned away. Deaths recorded incorrectly, intentionally. Then Mara froze. "Elena," she said slowly. "This journal mentions Margaret Hale." Elena stiffened. "What?" Mara read aloud. "Margaret Hale was not the first to try to claim what did not belong to her. She will not be the last. She is careful. She is patient. And she believes truth can be outweighed." Elena's face drained of color. "This was written before Margaret was born." "Yes," Mara said. "Which means she was part of something older," Elena finished. "A pattern." Mara turned to the final page. There was no writing. Just a pressed lavender sprig, brittle with age. And beneath it, in faded ink, "When the last of us is threatened, call the witness who knows how to listen." Mara closed the journal slowly. "That's you," Elena said. "It's always been you." The weight of it settled over Mara's chest, not pride, not fear, but a quiet, terrifying sense of inevitability. Before she could respond, a sound echoed through the house. The unmistakable click of a door unlocking. Elena rose instantly. "I locked that." Mara stood, pulse steadying into focus. Then she didn't come alone. Heavy footsteps crossed the entry hall. A man's voice joined the woman's, low, amused. "You see," the woman said. "I told you the house would open for them." Mara met Elena's gaze. The past hadn't just caught up to them. It had brought witnesses. The footsteps stopped just outside the west wing. Mara and Elena stood shoulder to shoulder in the narrow circular room, the pale journal cradled against Mara's chest like a living thing. The air felt charged, as though the house itself were listening, choosing sides. Elena's voice was steady when she spoke. "There's a secondary exit behind the north stair." Mara shook her head once. "They're not here to steal. They're here to see what we know." "And if they take it?" Elena asked quietly, nodding toward the journal. "Then they lose," Mara replied. "Because we've already read it." The footsteps resumed. A woman's silhouette appeared in the doorway first, tall, composed, wearing a dark coat that suggested she had dressed carefully for this moment. Her hair was pulled back with severe neatness. Her expression held polite interest, as though she were stepping into a gallery rather than a private home. Behind her stood a man in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that blended easily into crowds. "Well," the woman said lightly, eyes flicking from Elena to Mara and lingering on the journal. "You've been busy." Elena stepped forward. "You're trespassing, Nora." Nora smiled. "Technically, I still represent several interested parties. Estates are complicated things." "They're not yours," Elena snapped. "Everything is someone's," Nora replied. "The question is who gets there first." Mara's gaze sharpened. "You broke into a protected historic site." Nora turned to her with open curiosity. "You must be Mara Quinn, the archivist." Mara didn't deny it. "I've read your work," Nora continued. "You're very good at making inconvenient things legible." "That tends to upset people who profit from obscurity," Mara said. Nora laughed softly. "Exactly." The man shifted his weight, eyes scanning the room. "We should be quick." Nora nodded, then looked back at Elena. "Margaret always said you'd be the problem. Too sentimental. Too principled." Elena's hands curled into fists. "Margaret burned my house." Nora shrugged. "Margaret tried to acquire your house. Fire is just one tool." Mara felt something cold settle into place inside her. "You know this journal proves criminal conspiracy spanning generations." Nora's eyes flicked again to the pale cover. "Which is why it can't exist." She extended her hand. "Give it to me." "No," Elena said instantly. Mara didn't move. The silence stretched. Then Nora sighed. "I hoped we could do this politely." The man stepped forward. Elena reacted without thinking. She shoved the trunk hard, sending it skidding across the floor. Mara pivoted at the same time, darting past the doorway, the journal clutched tight. The man lunged. Mara felt fingers brush her sleeve, but Elena was there, grabbing the man's arm, slamming her shoulder into his chest. The impact echoed through the stone corridors. "Go!" Elena shouted. Mara ran. The house blurred around her, hallways folding into one another, memory guiding her feet more than sight. She ducked through the hidden panel near the pantry, slid it shut behind her, heart pounding. She could hear voices now. Shouting. The crash of something breaking. Mara forced herself to slow her breathing. "Think like the house," she told herself. She slipped through the narrow passage, descended the concealed stair, and emerged into the old wine cellar, a space half carved into the cliff itself. She tucked the journal behind a loose stone she had catalogued years ago, then straightened just as footsteps echoed down the stairs. Nora appeared first. Unruffled. Impressed. "You really do understand this place," Nora said. "That's why I don't want to hurt you." Mara met her gaze. "Then leave." Nora smiled thinly. "I can't." Behind her, Elena was forced down the steps by the man, her wrist held tightly. Rage flared through Mara, sharp and bright. "This ends now," Mara said. Nora tilted her head. "Does it?" Before Mara could answer, a sound rolled through the cellar, a deep, resonant groan. The stone beneath their feet shifted. The house was moving. Dust fell from the ceiling. A section of wall slid partially open, revealing another hidden chamber, one neither Mara nor Elena had ever seen. Inside it, bound in oilcloth, lay documents stamped with seals old and unmistakable. Nora went very still. "Oh," she breathed. "So that's where they put it." Mara felt a grim smile touch her mouth. "You wanted the house to open," she said. "Be careful what you ask for." Sirens wailed in the distance, faint, but growing louder. Elena stared at Mara in disbelief. "You called them?" Mara nodded once. "An anonymous tip about a break-in at a protected heritage site. Turns out the past has excellent timing." Nora exhaled slowly, recalculating. "This isn't over," she said. "No," Mara agreed. "It's finally begun." The police arrived at Vale House just as the sky began to bleed pink into gray, the sunrise reflecting off the cliffs and the restless sea below. Sirens screamed down the coastal road, echoing against stone walls and empty windows, announcing the arrival of the outside world in a place that had been built to hide it. Mara watched from the hallway, the journal pressed tightly to her chest. Elena stood beside her, leaning against the doorway of the hidden passage as if the house itself were giving her one last anchor before exposure. Two officers entered the room cautiously, their eyes flicking from the shattered panel in the west wing to the pair of women standing there. "Is everyone safe?" one asked, voice clipped but not unkind. "Yes," Elena said, straightening. "We're fine." The officers exchanged a glance, clearly aware there was more than just a break-in here. One of them gestured toward the cellar. "We were called about reports of," he stopped himself, swallowed, then continued, "unauthorized entry." Mara stepped forward, journal still in her hands. "It wasn't just an entry," she said quietly. "Someone was trying to erase history." The officer frowned. "History?" "This house contains centuries of documents, journals, records, things that were deliberately hidden, stolen, and falsified," Mara said, voice steady now. "It's not just property. It's legacy." The officers shifted. The man in the coat, the one who had come with Nora, was nowhere in sight. Elena's hand brushed Mara's, subtle but grounding. Mara felt a thrill run through her, fear, adrenaline, and something she hadn't let herself feel in years, hope. "They'll be back," Elena said softly. "Yes," Mara agreed. "But we won this moment." Later, when the officers left, the house felt different. The light through the windows seemed sharper, cleaner, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Elena and Mara moved slowly through the west wing, the pale journal now resting safely on the desk. "You realize," Mara said, "that you can't hide here anymore." Elena ran a hand over the old wood of the doorframe. "I know. And yet, I don't want to leave. Not again." Mara studied her, the lines of her face softened by the morning light. "We have a choice," she said. "We can vanish again. We can go back to anonymity. Or we can stay, and live openly. Even if it's dangerous." Elena's lips parted. "I've spent my life in the shadows. Afraid of being taken away. Afraid of being wronged. Afraid of love." Mara stepped closer. "Then don't be afraid anymore. Not with me." The words hung between them. The house seemed to pulse, walls vibrating faintly underfoot, as if approving. Elena's eyes glistened. "And if the town reacts poorly? If history punishes us?" Mara shrugged. "Then we face it together. Like we should have 15 years ago." A long silence stretched. Finally, Elena took Mara's hand in both of hers. "All right," she whispered. "We stay. We fight. We live." Mara smiled, a mixture of relief and quiet triumph. "And we make sure the house remembers correctly this time." Outside, the cliffs roared with the ocean. Vale House stood stubborn against the wind, ancient and impervious, and for the first time in decades, it was not hiding its truths. Inside, Mara and Elena finally allowed themselves to breathe, their hands intertwined, hearts synchronized. The shadows of the past were still present, yes, but now, there was light. The day the story broke, Blackthorn Cove seemed caught between two realities. By mid-morning, journalists had arrived, cameras glinting under the weak winter sun, microphones thrust into faces that had once gone unremarked. The local paper ran a front-page headline Mara had never imagined seeing. "Vale House Secrets, Historian and Heiress Uncover Century-Old Conspiracy." Mara and Elena stood on the cliff above the sea, Vale House behind them, wind tugging at their coats and hair. The ocean roared beneath, relentless, indifferent, but somehow steadying. "You think we made the right choice?" Mara asked, turning to Elena. Elena's eyes followed the horizon. "I think we finally stopped running. For once, the past isn't chasing us. We're facing it head-on." A seagull shrieked, swooping past them, white wings glinting. Mara let out a slow breath. The first reporters appeared at the driveway below, snapping photos, asking questions. A mix of excitement and outrage spread quickly through the town. Townspeople gathered, drawn by curiosity, old grudges, or loyalty. Some whispered in shock, others stared openly, judgment and wonder warring on their faces. Mara felt Elena's hand tighten around hers. "They won't all understand," Elena said. "They don't have to," Mara replied. "We do." They descended the path together, stepping toward the crowd without fear. Every step was deliberate, a declaration. Vale House had survived fires, theft, and silence. Its secrets were now alive, and so were they. The crowd parted slightly as they reached the base of the cliff. A woman in her 60s stepped forward. Mara recognized her, the clerk at the Historic Records office, the one who had quietly shared information. "You too," she said, eyes bright, "you've done what I thought impossible." Elena nodded. "It wasn't just us. The house guided us." Mara held the journal against her chest. "And now it's time people know the truth." The woman smiled faintly, understanding the weight of those words. The first interview was tense. A reporter asked directly about Margaret Hale's involvement in the estate and the attempted erasure of historical records. Elena answered with calm precision, detailing the fire, the hidden journals, and the generations of women whose lives had been erased or misrepresented. Mara stood beside her, adding context and verifying the authenticity of the journals. Questions came faster than either of them could answer. Cameras flashed. Microphones hovered like metal bees. A man from the town council stepped forward, voice tight. "You're rewriting our history." Mara met his gaze. "No. We're revealing it. History is what actually happened, not what some hoped you'd believe." Whispers spread through the crowd. Some nodded in quiet admiration. Others scowled, unwilling to accept what had been hidden for decades. Elena turned toward Mara, exhaling slowly. "I never imagined standing here," she said softly. Mara reached for her hand. "Neither did I. But it's better than disappearing again." By sunset, the crowd had thinned, leaving Vale House standing proud against the glowing horizon. The sky burned orange and pink, fading slowly to the cold purple of evening. The house no longer felt like a trap or a relic. It was a statement. Elena and Mara climbed the cliff path to a small overlook, the wind tugging at their clothes. The ocean below crashed with a sound both violent and comforting. "Do you ever wonder," Elena said, "what will happen next?" "All the time," Mara admitted. "But I also know we face it together. That makes everything else manageable." Elena leaned against Mara, resting her head on her shoulder. "It feels right," she whispered. "Yes," Mara said, tilting her head so their foreheads touched. "It finally does." They stood there long after the sun disappeared, wrapped in coats and hands and a quiet, undeniable love. The past had been laid bare. The present was theirs. And the future, whatever storms it brought, would be faced together, unhidden and unafraid. Vale House was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, it was alive with echoes. Footsteps that hadn't existed for decades, whispers of journals being read, locks being picked in imagination rather than in action. Mara and Elena moved through the house together, their hands brushing, fingers occasionally intertwining. Each touch was deliberate, tethering them to the moment, to each other, to a choice they had made together. Outside, the wind carried the salt of the sea and the faint hint of snow. The town below had quieted after the initial storm of reporters and curious onlookers, but Mara knew the calm was temporary. Blackthorn Cove never forgot, and it never forgave easily. "Elena," Mara whispered as they descended the staircase to the library, "you think they'll come back? The ones who tried to take everything?" Elena's hand paused on the banister. She looked down at the polished floor, shadows of the chandelier flickering across her face. "They might," she admitted. "But we're no longer alone in this house. And we know the secrets now, not just the hiding places." Mara nodded. So whatever they do, we can't be caught unprepared. A soft knock at the door startled them both. Mara moved toward it cautiously. Who's there? She called. A woman's voice, low and cautious, answered, It's me, from the archives office. Mara opened the door. The woman's face was familiar, concerned, hesitant, but relieved. I thought you might need someone to watch the back channels, she said. After today, after everything that came out, people will try to exploit it. I want to help. Elena exhaled softly. We can use allies. Thank you. The woman, Clara, as Mara remembered, nodded. She looked around at the sprawling library, the journals carefully stacked, and her eyes softened. It's beautiful here. And dangerous, she said. I know why you stayed. Mara looked at Elena. We stayed because the house isn't just stone and wood. It's memory. And we won't let it be stolen again. Later, they sat together by the fire, journals spread across the low table like open seas, candlelight flickering across spines and gilded edges. The pale journal Mara had found in the hidden west wing lay open between them, a thread tying generations together. Elena reached for Mara's hand, intertwining fingers. Do you ever regret coming back? She asked softly. Mara shook her head. No. Not once. Every fear, every danger, it brought us here, together. A pause, the kind that stretches the heart without words. The wind rattled the windows, and the house seemed to settle around them, protective, almost approving. I missed you, Elena said, voice low. Even after 15 years, I never stopped thinking about what we could have had if. Mara leaned closer, brushing her forehead to Elena's. Don't finish that sentence. We're here now. That's what matters. Elena closed her eyes, letting herself rest against Mara. For the first time in years, she allowed herself the illusion of permanence. Not the fragile kind, not the fleeting kind, they were building something enduring. Together. A shadow flickered in the corner of the library, subtle, almost imagined. Mara noticed, her instincts alert. They're still watching, she murmured. Elena squeezed her hand. Let them watch. We're ready this time. Mara nodded. And we'll keep the house safe. And us. The wind howled around Vale House, carrying the scent of sea and storm. Inside, the fire crackled, the journals held centuries of secrets, and two women, once lost, now found, sat shoulder to shoulder, hearts aligned with history and hope alike. In the distance, the town slept, unaware that their truths had shifted, that the past had been confronted, and that love, slow, deliberate, undeniable, had taken root in the heart of Vale House. The morning came like a warning. Vale House sat under a slate-gray sky, the cliffs shrouded in mist, the sea churning below with the kind of furious patience only oceans can hold. Mara woke first, the journal pressed to her chest, its pages whispering across time. Outside, gulls shrieked and wind tore through the trees, rattling the shutters. She found Elena in the library, already awake, kneeling over the journal sprawled across the table. Her hair fell loose around her face, streaked with the pale gray of early winter, and her eyes were sharp, alert, calculating, alive. They're moving faster than we thought, Elena said without looking up. Mara frowned. Who? Elena gestured toward the open ledger. The ones trying to take what doesn't belong to them. They're coordinating, making inquiries, digging through old legal filings. They're not subtle anymore. Mara pulled her coat tight around her. Then we need to be ready. We can't let them manipulate the town, or us, again. Elena's eyes lifted, dark and steady. We won't. By mid-afternoon, the first threats arrived. Letters slipped under doors, anonymous calls to the local paper claiming that the women at Vale House were hoarding documents, manipulating history, and hiding truths better left buried. Mara read them carefully, noting each nuance, each attempt at intimidation. They want us to doubt ourselves, she said quietly. But we know the truth. That's our weapon. Elena nodded, moving beside her, hands brushing over the table. We'll confront them, not hide. Together. Mara's hand found hers, firm, grounding. Together, she echoed. The confrontation came at dusk. A black SUV arrived at the gate, sleek, silent, carrying 3 figures with confidence and cold calculation. Mara and Elena stood on the balcony above the front steps, the wind whipping through their coats, as the car pulled to a stop. The door opened. A tall woman in a sharp coat stepped out, Nora. Mara's heart tightened, but she stood her ground. Behind Nora, 2 men followed, one with a clipboard, one with a camera. You've been busy, Nora said, voice smooth, almost conversational, as though they were meeting for tea rather than a standoff. Mara didn't reply. Elena's hand tightened on hers. Nora's gaze flicked to the balcony. I've given you every chance. The documents. The journals. You could have left quietly. Mara's voice was calm, deliberate. We could have disappeared. But we didn't. You underestimated us, and the house. History doesn't care about sentiment, Nora said sharply. You're playing a dangerous game. Elena stepped forward, her presence fierce, commanding. And you're about to lose. The tension stretched, taut as a wire, until the first of the locals arrived. Word had spread. People came down from the town, armed with curiosity, determination, and the knowledge that Vale House belonged to the truth, and its keepers. Nora's face flickered with hesitation. Mara realized then that control was not just in her hands, it was in the hands of the town, of generations of women who had left their marks here, quietly, invisibly, enduring. Mara turned to Elena. We hold them here, she said. Together. Elena's eyes glinted. Together. Night fell over Vale House, the storm outside echoing the tension inside. The winds tore at the cliffs, waves crashing like warnings against stone. Inside, Mara and Elena stood shoulder to shoulder, journals secure, documents catalogued, histories intact. Nora and her accomplices retreated with the knowledge that their attempts were thwarted, at least for now. The house, alive with centuries of secrets, seemed to settle around its guardians, protective, approving. Elena brushed Mara's hair back from her face. We did it, she said softly. Mara shook her head, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. We're just beginning. The storm raged outside, but inside Vale House, for the first time in decades, there was calm. The fire in the hearth crackled, shadows danced along the walls, and 2 women, once separated by fear and circumstance, finally stood unafraid, unhidden, and together. The tides of the past had met the fire of the present, and Vale House had endured, as had their love. The morning after the storm, Vale House felt renewed, not just from the wind and rain but from the certainty Mara and Elena carried. The house no longer whispered of secrets being stolen, it hummed with purpose. Every stone, every carved railing, every hidden nook seemed to acknowledge the presence of its guardians. Mara sat at the long oak table in the library, journals spread out before her like a constellation. Ink-stained fingers hovered over a new ledger she had begun. This was not a record for hiding but for sharing, cataloging every secret, every encoded letter, every life that had passed through Vale House. Elena approached quietly, a cup of coffee in her hands, eyes soft but alert. You're up early, Mara said without looking up. Sleep doesn't linger when history is awake, Elena replied, setting the cup down beside her. She rested a hand lightly on Mara's shoulder, warmth and grounding all at once. Are you sure you want to make all of this public? Mara finally looked up, meeting Elena's gaze. Yes. The town, the historians, the world, everyone deserves to know what these women endured. And, we can't hide anymore. Elena smiled faintly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind Mara's ear. Then let's do it together. As witnesses. As keepers. The first journal they shared publicly was the pale one from the West Wing. Mara read excerpts at a small gathering in the town hall. Residents, journalists, and a handful of historians leaned in, captivated by the story of women who had lived, loved, and endured in silence. Mara watched Elena from the front of the room. Her hand found Elena's, squeezing gently. The act was electric, grounding them both in the moment, in the present, in the knowledge that they had survived what had once seemed insurmountable. When Mara finished, there was silence. Then, a woman from the audience, elderly and sharp-eyed, rose. "My grandmother knew of this," she said softly. "She feared the world would never understand. You've done it for all of us." Elena stepped forward. "Not just for you. For everyone who's ever had to hide love, truth, or themselves." Applause followed, not hesitant, not polite, but full and reverent. Mara felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This moment, like so many others in the past weeks, was theirs, and it had been a hard one. That evening, the library was warm with firelight. The journals rested neatly in their designated shelves. Elena poured wine into 2 glasses, her movements slow, deliberate, intimate. "To survival," she said, raising her glass. "To truth," Mara answered, clinking hers against Elena's. They drank, lingering over the warmth and taste, the comfort of closeness. Then, Mara moved closer, brushing her lips gently against Elena's. It was slow, deliberate, savoring the familiarity and the rediscovery of a love paused, not lost. Elena responded with equal care, hands tracing Mara's back, pulling her closer, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath her palm. For the first time in years, fear had no place between them. They moved to the sofa by the fire, journals forgotten for the moment. Mara's head rested against Elena's shoulder, their legs tangled together, the world outside Vale House receding to nothing but wind and waves and candlelight. "I never thought we'd get here," Elena whispered. Mara tilted her head, resting her forehead against hers. "I knew we would," she said softly. "Because some truths can't be hidden forever. And some loves find their way back, no matter the distance." Elena smiled against her hair. "Then let's make a promise." "Which is?" Mara asked. "To face everything together," Elena said. "Every storm, every shadow, every joy, and every sorrow." Mara nodded, sealing the promise with a kiss that was tender and fierce all at once. The fire crackled, the journals rested safely, and the house itself seemed to breathe with them, alive, protective, eternal. In that moment, Mara and Elena were no longer survivors of a hidden past, they were architects of a shared present, and the future was theirs to write. Winter's first snow settled softly over Blackthorn Cove, dusting Vale House with a quiet, forgiving whiteness. The cliffs gleamed, jagged against the pale horizon, and the ocean beneath whispered secrets only the house and its guardians could understand. Mara and Elena stood at the edge of the library balcony, wrapped in thick coats, hands intertwined. Below, a small group of townspeople and historians moved through the gardens, cataloging the grounds, examining the architecture, and taking notes for the new public archive. Vale House was no longer hidden. It was alive, teaching, remembered. "You see?" Mara said, her voice light but sure. "The town isn't afraid anymore. They understand now." Elena's eyes followed the figures below. "Some of them," she murmured. "Others are still wary. But yes, the house is safe, for now." Mara squeezed her hand. "We've done more than protect history. We've created a bridge between past and present." Elena leaned her head against Mara's shoulder. "And the future?" "The future," Mara said softly, "we write together." The following weeks were busy. The journals were digitized, carefully preserved, and slowly shared with universities, local libraries, and women's historical societies. Scholars arrived to study the encoded letters, the secret rooms, and the network of women who had endured in silence for centuries. Mara guided them through the hidden passages, Elena providing context for the family history, her voice both authoritative and gentle. Through it all, they never left each other's side. Lunches were shared in quiet corners. Nights were spent by the fire, the journals closed, the only heat coming from their bodies and the connection that had been rekindled, stronger than before. One evening, Mara found herself alone in the hidden West Wing, placing the last journal on its designated shelf. She ran her fingers over the leather, tracing the names etched into history, and felt the weight of generations settling around her. Elena joined her, leaning against the doorway. "You always have a way of speaking to the house," she said softly. Mara turned, smiling. "I learned from you." They walked together to the balcony, looking out at the snow-dusted cliffs. The sea roared beneath, relentless, but somehow reassuring. "I used to think love had to hide," Elena whispered. "That being brave meant being alone." "Being brave," Mara said, "means being willing to return. To face the past. To protect it, and the people you care about." Elena tilted her head, eyes softening. "And us?" Mara drew her close, resting her forehead against hers. "Us is forever." Elena smiled, fingers tracing the curve of Mara's cheek. "Then let's make it last." That night, they lit the fireplaces in the West Wing and the library, scattered lanterns across the halls, and opened the windows to let in the crisp winter air. For the first time, Vale House was not a hiding place. It was a home. A sanctuary. A beacon of courage, love, and history preserved. They sat together, wrapped in blankets, journals resting nearby, and for hours, they simply held each other, listening to the sea and the wind, feeling the pulse of the house beneath their feet. Mara whispered, "One day, someone else will find these journals. Someone who needs to know the women who came before them. The women who survived." Elena nodded. "And they'll understand. Because we made sure of it." The night stretched on, filled with quiet laughter, whispers, and kisses that spoke of love reclaimed. The past had been confronted, the present claimed, and the future, their future, was theirs alone to shape. Vale House, ever watchful, stood strong on the cliffs, a guardian of secrets, stories, and love that refused to be forgotten. And within its walls, Mara and Elena wrote the beginning of a new legacy, together. The morning sun cut through the mist over Blackthorn Cove like a knife, illuminating Vale House in sharp, unforgiving clarity. The house, so long a haven of secrets, now stood exposed, not just to the town but to those who would test its defenses again. Mara and Elena moved through the West Wing with quiet precision, preparing for the day ahead. The journals were packed for secure transport to the Historical Society, and the hidden compartments were carefully locked, ensuring no one could access them without their knowledge. "We knew this day would come," Elena said softly, adjusting the clasp of her coat. "The outside world isn't patient." Mara nodded. "They'll come with intentions, some curious, some malicious. But we're ready." The first visitor arrived at the gates mid-morning, a man in a tailored suit, carrying an air of authority that only partially concealed the sharp edge of intimidation. "Good morning," he said, voice smooth. "I represent several interested parties in the Vale estate. We'd like to discuss the documents recently revealed to the public." Elena's hand brushed Mara's for reassurance. "You're welcome to discuss," she said evenly, "but only in the house, with full transparency." The man's eyes flicked over the structure, the carvings, the stone walls. "Transparency," he repeated, "is different from public exposure." Mara stepped forward, calm and steady. "We define transparency here. The documents belong to history, not to your convenience." The man's gaze sharpened, but before he could respond, a small group of townspeople arrived, neighbors who had witnessed the unveiling of the journals and now came to support Mara and Elena. Their presence was subtle but firm, a reminder that Vale House was no longer isolated in its authority. Elena's voice was quiet but commanding. "This house remembers who it protects. And it protects truth." The man hesitated, realizing the strength of allies and history combined. He nodded curtly, then turned, making a show of retreat. Mara exhaled slowly. "It never gets easier," she murmured. "No," Elena agreed. "But it gets stronger. And we're not alone." That evening, Mara and Elena walked the cliff path, overlooking the ocean. The wind was brisk, salty, alive. It carried the scent of change and endurance. We've survived another challenge, Mara said, wrapping an arm around Elena. Elena rested her head on Mara's shoulder. And we've done it together. That's the important part. Mara smiled. It always is. The journals, carefully catalogued and protected, lay inside the house, waiting for future generations. But it wasn't just the documents that mattered, it was the courage they had cultivated, the love that had grown unshakable, and the knowledge that Vale House would endure as a sanctuary of truth. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting gold and violet over the cliffs, Mara and Elena stood together, hand in hand, hearts aligned. The past had challenged them, the present tested them, but the future, their future, was theirs to shape. And within Vale House, every secret kept, every story preserved, and every love endured whispered quietly. They are home. Winter had loosened its grip on Blackthorn Cove, and spring's first whispers threaded through the air, carrying scents of salt, budding flowers, and wet stone. Vale House, standing tall against the cliffs, seemed almost alive, breathing with the rhythm of the ocean below and the steady pulse of its guardians. Mara and Elena moved through the house with an easy familiarity, their routines blending work, love, and vigilance. The journals had been fully archived, digitized, and secured. Scholars visited regularly, but the house no longer felt like a museum. It was a living home, filled with warmth, laughter, and small, deliberate acts of joy. Elena carried a tray of tea into the west wing, setting it down on the low table near the window. I think it's time we finally bring some color back to this room, she said, glancing at the faded tapestries and dust-laden shelves. Mara smiled, brushing her fingers along a row of leather-bound journals. We've been so focused on history, we forgot that history can coexist with life. That afternoon, they took a walk along the cliff path, letting the wind whip through their hair, hands intertwined. Vale House loomed behind them, a testament to endurance and love, but the town below watched with curiosity and admiration, no longer suspicion. You know, Elena said, her voice quiet against the roar of the sea, I never thought I'd feel safe again. Not in this town, not in this house. Mara squeezed her hand. And yet here we are. Elena laughed softly. Yes. And you? Mara leaned close, brushing her lips against Elena's temple. It's always been us. Nothing else mattered. Not the house, not the journals, just us. Elena rested her forehead against Mara's. Then let's keep it that way. Evenings became a rhythm of quiet intimacy and shared purpose. They installed small workshops in the library, restoring old letters and artifacts, cataloging photographs, and preserving delicate remnants of lives long past. Scholars and visitors were welcomed into these spaces, but Mara and Elena remained the silent, protective anchors, ensuring that the house was never just a relic, but a sanctuary. One evening, as firelight danced across the walls, Mara traced the curve of Elena's hand. Do you remember the first time we explored the hidden passages? Elena smiled. How could I forget? I thought I knew the house, but you taught me it had a mind of its own. And it still does, Mara said softly. And it watches over us. Elena leaned against her, their hands intertwined, the journals closed for the night, the wind outside carrying the rhythm of the sea. I never thought home could feel like this. Mara smiled, resting her head on Elena's shoulder. Home isn't just a place. It's who you choose to stand with, day after day. The house hummed quietly around them, alive with memory, love, and the promise of safety. Vale House was no longer a place to hide, it was a foundation. A legacy. And in the heart of it, Mara and Elena had built a home, not just for themselves, but for every story, every truth, and every love that had once been forced into the shadows. Spring deepened, and Vale House thrummed with life. The archives had become a quiet hub of learning and refuge. Scholars came and went, townspeople visited, and Mara and Elena welcomed each one with care, making sure the house remained both a sanctuary and a home. But even as the house flourished, the world outside reminded them that vigilance never fully rested. A storm rolled in one evening, winds whipping across the cliffs, waves crashing furiously below. The electricity flickered, and the faint smell of rain mingled with salt and stone. Mara and Elena moved through the house together, checking locks, securing windows, and ensuring the journals were safely tucked in their shelves. "Storms always make the past feel louder," Elena said, gripping Mara's hand. "Like the walls remember every secret." Mara smiled softly. "And that's why we're here. To listen, to protect, and to keep the past from hurting the present." As night fell, they lit the fireplaces, and the house glowed with warmth. Outside, thunder rumbled, and lightning illuminated the cliffs in stark, brilliant flashes. Mara and Elena sat close, legs intertwined on the sofa, blankets draped over their shoulders. "You know," Elena said, resting her head on Mara's chest, "I was terrified the first time we faced Margaret Hale, and then Nora. I thought we'd never get past the fear." Mara stroked her hair gently. "We did. We faced it together. Every danger, every shadow, we survived it. And now, we're stronger for it." Elena's fingers traced the curve of Mara's jaw. "I think that's what love should be. Not just passion, but courage. Safety. Trust." Mara kissed her gently, savoring the warmth that had grown between them, slow and steady, like the fire in the hearth. "Then we'll keep building it. Every day." The storm outside intensified, but inside Vale House, they were a fortress. They shared stories of past women, whispered about dreams for the future, and allowed themselves the quiet comfort of ordinary life, cooking together, reading by the fire, laughing at small absurdities, and holding each other through the thunder and the wind. Mara realized something profound in the quiet moments. Vale House wasn't just a house anymore. It was a vessel for resilience, for courage, for love that refused to be hidden. And they were not only its protectors, they were its living proof that history could coexist with life, and that love could thrive even amid storms. Elena lifted her gaze to meet Mara's, eyes shining. "Do you think we're ready for the next chapter?" Mara smiled, brushing her lips against hers. "We've already started it." Outside, the storm raged, but inside, the house hummed softly, a sanctuary of safety, of trust, and of love earned and kept. Vale House, with all its history and secrets, had finally found its keepers. And Mara and Elena, hand in hand, were its heart. Spring had fully claimed Blackthorn Cove. The cliffs glistened with morning dew, and wildflowers had begun to creep between the cracks of Vale House's stone terraces. The house seemed to exhale with life, no longer just a monument of secrets but a home alive with purpose. Mara and Elena moved through the rooms with ease, finishing the preparations for a small gathering. They had invited young scholars, local historians, and women who had expressed interest in preserving their own family histories. It was a subtle act of mentorship, a way to ensure the past they had fought to protect would ripple into the future. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Elena asked softly as they arranged chairs in the library. Mara looked at her, eyes tracing the lines of her face that mirrored the soft light of the morning. "Every day. And I still feel like we're just beginning." Elena smiled. "I like beginnings, as long as we're together." The guests arrived, cautious but curious. Mara guided them through the hidden passages, showing the secret alcoves and the journals that had once been hidden from the world. Elena provided context, sharing stories of women who had endured oppression, betrayal, and loss, yet had left traces for the future. One young woman lingered near the west wing, eyes wide with wonder. "I never knew places could hold memory like this," she said. Mara smiled. "They do. And the people who protect them become part of that memory." Elena's hand found Mara's, subtle and grounding. "We hope you carry it forward," she added. "Every story matters." Evening settled over the cliffs, painting the ocean and sky in shades of violet and gold. The guests had left, but the warmth of shared knowledge and quiet reverence lingered in the air. Mara and Elena stood on the balcony, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the sea crash below. "We've planted seeds," Mara said. "And now we get to watch them grow." Elena rested her forehead against Mara's. "I can feel it, in the house, in us." Mara brushed a hand along Elena's cheek. It's been a long journey, hasn't it? Elena nodded. A lifetime in moments. But I wouldn't trade a single one. Mara leaned in, capturing her lips in a slow, tender kiss that spoke of years reclaimed and promises kept. The firelight from inside the library spilled onto the balcony, reflecting in the waves below like a constellation of quiet hope. Outside, the wind carried whispers of the past, echoes of women long gone, and the laughter of the present. Inside, Vale House hummed with warmth and life, a living testament to resilience, courage, and love that refused to be hidden. For Mara and Elena, the house had given them roots, and together, they were ready to take flight. The first chill of late spring lingered in the air, brushing against the cliffs and through the open windows of Vale House. The house, alive with memory and purpose, seemed to hum with anticipation. But even as life flowed through its halls, Mara and Elena knew that challenges were never far behind. A letter arrived that morning, slipped under the main doors with careful precision. Mara unfolded it slowly, her fingers tracing the elegant, anonymous script. The past is never truly gone. Neither are the debts it leaves behind. Protect what you cherish, or it will be taken. Elena read over her shoulder, eyes narrowing. Subtle. But intentional. Mara's jaw tightened. Someone knows we've made the archives public. Someone doesn't want the truth out. Elena rested a hand on Mara's arm. We've faced worse. Together. Mara nodded, though a thread of unease pulled at her. The house had weathered storms, fires, and intruders, but this was different. The threat was unseen, calculated, patient. That evening, the wind carried a tension that settled over Vale House like a shroud. Mara and Elena moved through the halls with quiet vigilance, checking the locks, scanning the grounds, and ensuring the journals remained secure. Do you ever feel like the house warns us? Mara asked, her voice soft. Elena smiled faintly. It does. But we've learned to listen. A sudden noise, metal scraping against stone, echoed from the west wing. Mara's heart leapt, and Elena was instantly at her side. They crept through the corridor, hands intertwined, hearts synchronized. At the end of the hallway, the light from the fire revealed nothing out of place. The journals sat undisturbed, the furniture intact. Yet Mara could feel the weight of eyes that were not their own, shadows that did not belong to the house. Elena leaned close. It's a warning, she whispered. Not an attack. Yet. Mara exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Then we prepare. And we stay together. The next days were filled with careful vigilance. Visitors were welcomed, but surveillance and discretion became routine. Every knock at the door, every note slipped under the threshold, was evaluated with care. Mara and Elena shared quiet moments of tenderness, coffee in the sunroom, hands brushing over the table, whispers of love in the night, but always with one eye on the unseen threat. One evening, Elena traced Mara's fingers, interlacing them with her own. Do you ever regret standing so openly in the light? Mara shook her head, squeezing Elena's hand. No. The light is where we belong. Even if it brings danger. Elena smiled softly. Then we face it together, as always. Mara leaned in, resting her forehead against Elena's. Together, she echoed, voice steady. Outside, the cliffs roared with the ocean, waves crashing as if reminding them that some forces could not be tamed. Inside, Vale House remained a sanctuary, alive with memory and love, with two women standing unshakable at its center. The threat lingered, unseen but present, a test of vigilance, trust, and courage. And Mara and Elena, bound by history and heart, would endure it. Together. The threat Mara and Elena had felt for weeks finally revealed itself, not with force, but with cunning. A knock came at the door just after dusk, slow and deliberate. The tone was familiar, polite, yet heavy with intention. Mara glanced at Elena, and they shared a silent understanding. Elena moved to the door first, her hand steady as she opened it. A man in a tailored suit, sharp eyes glinting in the fading light, stood on the porch. Good evening, he said smoothly. I represent a consortium interested in the Vale archives. We'd like to examine your holdings privately. Mara's hand rested lightly on Elena's back. The holdings are not for private inspection, she said evenly. Everything is already archived and available publicly. The man's smile faltered. I see. Well, I'm certain we can come to an arrangement. Elena's eyes narrowed. We don't negotiate with threats or intimidation. He straightened, and for a heartbeat, the air between them seemed to tense. Then, almost reluctantly, he stepped back. Very well. But remember, he said, voice low, some histories are not meant to be shared. And just like that, he left, leaving Mara and Elena standing in the doorway, the wind whipping around them, carrying the scent of salt and storm. Once inside, they secured the doors and double-checked the journals, their hands lingering on the bindings as if drawing strength from the leather and ink. Elena exhaled, leaning against Mara. Every time we open these doors, we risk exposure. But closing them would be worse. Mara nodded, brushing a strand of hair from Elena's face. We can't hide anymore. Not from history, not from ourselves, not from love. The house seemed to echo her words, its walls solid and unyielding, a sanctuary built to withstand time and human interference. That night, the storm outside mirrored the tension within. Thunder rolled across the cliffs, waves pounded the rocks, and wind rattled the shutters. Mara and Elena moved together through the house, checking each room, each lock, each hidden passage. Finally, they settled in the library, curled beneath a heavy blanket, firelight flickering across the shelves. Mara traced Elena's hand with her fingers, drawing warmth from the connection between them. Do you ever get scared? Elena asked softly, resting her head against Mara's shoulder. Of the storm? Of people trying to manipulate history? Of the past? Mara smiled faintly. Sometimes. But with you, I'm brave. Elena tilted her head up to kiss her gently. And I with you. The hours passed quietly, the storm raging outside, yet inside Vale House, there was only warmth, trust, and the steady heartbeat of two women who had survived shadows, threats, and secrets. The night ended not with fear, but with quiet certainty. They could face whatever came next. The threat would continue to test them, but together, they were unshakable. Their love, their courage, their devotion to preserving the past had created a sanctuary no outsider could touch. Vale House stood resilient against the wind and rain, but inside, Mara and Elena knew something stronger than walls and locks, a bond forged in history, tempered by adversity, and boundless in its endurance. The tension that had clung to Vale House like a persistent fog finally broke, not with violence, but with revelation. Mara and Elena awoke to the sound of urgent knocking at the front gates. Outside stood familiar faces from the town, allies who had quietly watched over them, combined with scholars who had come to study the archives. In their midst, the anonymous threats no longer held sway. What had once been fear now met clarity and solidarity. A tall man from the consortium arrived last, the same one who had visited days before. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, now softened slightly as he took in the gathered crowd. Mara and Elena exchanged a glance. They had faced storms before, but this, the culmination of months of vigilance, would demand strategy and courage, together. You've made your position clear, the man said, voice measured. And I see that you are not alone. Elena stepped forward, her stance steady. The archives belong to history. They will not be seized for private gain. And threats will not bend us. The man nodded slowly, acknowledging the firmness in her voice, then gestured toward the crowd. Then the matter is settled. Your work here will be respected. Mara felt the tension in her shoulders release like a wave retreating from the cliffs. She squeezed Elena's hand. Finally. Inside, Vale House hummed with a quiet victory. The journals were safe, the house intact, and their love unbroken by shadow or fear. Mara and Elena moved through the halls hand in hand, checking locks more out of habit than necessity, each room radiating the calm they had fought so hard to earn. Elena leaned against Mara in the library, eyes tracing the spines of the journals. It's strange, she said softly, after all the danger, it feels like the house is finally at peace. Mara nodded. It is. And we've earned that peace. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us. That evening, the two of them walked the cliff path, waves crashing beneath the precipice in a steady rhythm, a reminder of endurance and constancy. You know, Mara said, brushing a strand of hair from Elena's face, we've faced fire, storms, shadows, and we're still standing. Elena smiled, pressing her forehead against Mara's. We're stronger than we ever imagined. Together. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the ocean in gold and violet. They stood there in silence, holding each other, feeling the rhythm of the world beneath the sky, and the steady heartbeat between them. Mara whispered, it's more than survival. It's life. And we get to live it. Elena's fingers traced Mara's jaw. And love it. Fully, without fear. The threats that had loomed over Vale House now seemed like distant echoes. Their courage, their bond, and their devotion had outlasted every challenge. In the quiet aftermath, Mara and Elena realized that nothing, not storms, not shadows, not the past, could break what they had built together. Vale House, ever vigilant, had kept its promise. And within its walls, love and legacy endured, untouchable and unbroken. Decades had passed since Mara and Elena first uncovered Vale House's secrets. The cliff still rose jagged and proud above Blackthorn Cove, and the ocean below remained constant, its roar unchanged by time. But inside the house, life had grown in quiet, deliberate ways. The journals, once hidden and threatened, now rested in glass cases, digitized and accessible to historians, scholars, and women seeking courage in the stories of those who had lived before them. The house itself was no longer a fortress of secrecy, it was a living museum, a sanctuary, and a home all at once. Mara stood by the balcony, watching their daughter laugh with a group of young researchers in the garden below. Elena joined her, hands brushing together, the familiar warmth grounding them both. She's incredible, Mara whispered, smiling as their daughter paused to point out a rare inscription on one of the garden stones. Elena wrapped an arm around Mara's waist. She carries our past with pride, and she'll carry it forward. Mara nodded, tracing a hand along Elena's. We've done more than protect the house and its secrets. We've protected its spirit. And ours. The house was filled with quiet life that evening. Candles flickered, and the scent of sea and wood drifted through the halls. Mara and Elena wandered through the library together, stopping to read old letters and journals, tracing the lives of women who had endured in silence. I never imagined it would feel like this, Elena said softly, leaning against Mara. Like everything we've fought for, finally belongs to us and to everyone who needs it. Mara kissed her temple. We made it. Together. Every storm, every shadow, every threat, it led us here. Elena smiled, lifting Mara's hand to press a gentle kiss to her knuckles. And the love we've built, it's our true legacy. Their daughter joined them, carrying a small journal she had been working on herself, inspired by the stories of Vale House. I want to add our story, she said, eyes bright with determination and wonder. Mara and Elena exchanged a look, heart swelling. Then let's do it together, Mara said. Because stories aren't just about the past, they're about who we are, who we love, and what we leave behind. Elena nodded. Our legacy isn't just the house, or the journals, or the history we preserved. It's the courage to live, to love, and to stand unafraid. The three of them stood together on the balcony, the wind tugging gently at their hair, the cliffs and sea stretching endlessly before them. Vale House behind them hummed softly, as if acknowledging its guardians and the generations they had inspired. Their daughter leaned into them, and Mara and Elena each rested a hand on her shoulder. The world beyond the cliffs felt wide and full of possibility, yet they had already built something eternal here, a home, a sanctuary, and a love that refused to be hidden. Outside, the ocean roared in familiar rhythm. Inside, the house glowed with firelight, laughter, and stories preserved. And Vale House, with all its history, secrets, and enduring spirit, would continue to stand, a testament to courage, love, and the legacy that Mara and Elena had carved into the cliffs, the journals, and their hearts. Some secrets are meant to be found, and some loves are meant to last forever.